Every banned hockey move has a victim. A player who did not see it coming. A crowd that went silent. And a league office that finally said, never again. Hockey was never built for softness. It is fast, violent, emotional, and played on blades, inside walls, by athletes who can turn one stride into a collision that shakes an entire arena. That is part of the appeal. That is why people lean forward when a defender closes the gap, why benches rise when two bodies meet at full speed, why the sport has always carried the feeling that something dangerous could happen at any second. But there is a line, not the neat line drawn in a rule book, the real line, the one players understand in their bones. Hard hockey is win in position. Dirty hockey is taking away the other player's chance to protect himself. Hard hockey separates a man from the puck. Dirty hockey separates him from his balance, his vision, his knees, his memory, or his career. For a long time, the league let that line move. Some hits were celebrated before they were questioned. Some tricks were called veteran plays before cameras exposed what they really were. Some punishments only came after the damage was already done. This is not a countdown of big hits. This is a tour through the moves so dangerous, so cheap, and so impossible to defend against that the NHL had to step in and say the game could stay brutal, but it could not stay reckless. The first one looks almost invisible until the victim is already falling. It is called the slew foot. A slew foot does not need a giant windup. It does not need a flying elbow or a dramatic charge from across the ice. That is what makes it so filthy. It hides inside normal contact. One player gets close. A shoulder leans in, a stick battle starts. Maybe the puck is along the boards. Maybe two players are fighting for space in front of the net. Then one skate quietly hooks or kicks the opponent's leg out from under him while the upper body gets pushed in the opposite direction. For half a second, it barely looks like anything happened. Then gravity does the rest. The victim cannot brace. He cannot twist safely. He cannot choose how he lands. His feet vanish. His upper body snaps backward. And suddenly the ice is not a surface anymore. It is concrete. The danger is not just the fall. It is the surprise. A player who gets hit clean has a chance to tighten up, turn, absorb, survive. A player who gets slew-footed is robbed of that chance. That is why the move feels different from a hard check. It is not about strength. It is not about timing. It is about betrayal. And the nastiest part is that it often happens in places where officials are watching 5 other battles at once, in the crease, along the wall, after the whistle, during a scrum when every glove, stick, skate, and shoulder creates noise. For years, players could make it look accidental, just tangled feet, just a balance issue, just hockey chaos. But slow motion changed everything. Cameras showed the pattern. The leg does not simply get tangled, it sweeps. The upper body does not simply collide, it drives. The fall does not simply happen, it is manufactured. That is why the NHL rulebook treats slew footing as its own offense. It is not ordinary tripping, it is more violent than that. It combines a trip with a backward force, creating the kind of helpless fall that can lead to a concussion, a broken tailbone, a wrecked shoulder, or a neck injury. The league did not crack down because the move looked ugly. It cracked down because it removed consent from contact. In hockey, players accept that they can be hit. They do not accept being secretly flipped into the ice when their body has no way to answer. And once you understand the slew foot, you understand the whole theme of this video. The dirtiest moves are not always the loudest. Sometimes the most dangerous play in hockey is the one that looks like nothing until a player is flat on his back, staring at the rafters, trying to figure out who stole the ground from under him. Blindside hits are hockey's version of a jump scare, except the ending is not a scream. It is a body going limp before the crowd understands what it just saw. A clean open ice hit is violent, but at least it has a language. The puck carrier knows contact is possible. He can lower his shoulder, move the puck, brace through his legs, or take the hit and keep his head safe. That is the physical conversation hockey is built on. You carry the puck through danger, someone makes you pay. and both players know the bargain. A blindside hit breaks that bargain. The attacking player comes from a lane the victim cannot read. Not straight ahead, not shoulder to shoulder, not from the kind of angle where peripheral vision gives a warning. He arrives from the dark side of the play, usually when the puck carrier is reaching, turning, passing, or looking somewhere else entirely. That is why these hits became so controversial. The damage is not only about force, it is about helplessness. A player who never sees impact coming cannot prepare his neck. He cannot protect his jaw. He cannot tighten his core or shift his weight. The body stays loose until the hit detonates, and that is when the head whips, the helmet snaps, and the brain takes the real blow. For years, hockey culture treated this as intimidation. Keep your head up. Do not admire your pass. Do not skate through the middle with your eyes down. Those phrases were repeated like commandments, and there is truth in them. Awareness matters. Survival matters. The middle of the ice has never been a safe place. But the league eventually had to admit something uncomfortable. A warning is not a defense if the victim never has a fair chance to see the threat. That is the difference between punishment and predation. The blindside hit became a symbol of the old game colliding with the new one. In the old game, fear was part of the system. You made skilled players hesitate. You made them hear footsteps. You made the neutral zone feel haunted. In the modern game, the league still allows fear, but it no longer wants the kind of fear that comes from a player being erased from an angle his body cannot answer. And once head contact became impossible to ignore, blindside hits stopped looking like toughness. They started looking like a trap. The NHL did not remove them because fans stopped liking violence. Fans still rise for a massive clean hit. The league moved because the sport could no longer pretend that surprise impact to a vulnerable head was just part of the show. The most dangerous blindside hit is over before the victim even knows he is in danger. That is what makes it dirty. Not just the impact, the theft of warning. Head targeting is the point where hockey stopped being able to hide behind tradition. Because for a long time, the biggest hit in the arena was treated like a moral victory. If a player crossed the blue line with his head down and got crushed, people called it a lesson. If a star forward got punished for cutting through traffic, people called it old school. If a defender caught someone high and the crowd exploded, the replay could live forever. Then, the sport learned what those replays were really showing. A headshot is not just another collision. It attacks the control center. The jaw snaps. The neck bends. The brain moves inside the skull. Sometimes the player gets up and the arena cheers, but that does not mean he is fine. It means the damage is invisible for now. That is what made hits to the head so dangerous for the league. A broken stick is obvious. A cut over the eye is obvious. A player lying on the ice is obvious. But a concussion can walk to the bench. A concussion can answer questions. A concussion can say, "I am good," while the player is already losing balance, light, memory, and time. The old hockey argument was simple. Keep your head up. But that phrase became too small for the problem. Because even when a player makes a mistake, even when he puts himself in danger, the opponent still has a choice. He can drive through the shoulder, he can angle the body, he can separate man from puck without turning the skull into the target. The league had to make that choice matter. This is where the emotional center of the sport changed. Fans began to understand that a highlight can have a victim long after the broadcast ends. A player can lose months. He can lose confidence in traffic. He can lose sleep. He can lose the sharpness that made him elite. In the worst cases, he can lose pieces of himself that never fully come back. That is why head targeting became bigger than one rule. It became a referendum on what hockey wanted to be. Still brutal, yes. Still fast, yes. Still capable of making a crowd jump out of its seats, yes. But not a sport where the cleanest path to stopping skill is to attack the one part of the body that cannot be strengthened in the gym. The NHL did not ban head targeting because it wanted to protect feelings. It did it because the head is not part of the battle. It is the person inside the battle. Hits from behind are terrifying because the boards do not forgive. From the television angle, it can look simple. A player is chasing the puck into the corner. Another player follows. There is a push, a shove, a check, a little extra force at the wrong time. Then the man in front disappears into the wall and the entire building reacts before the referee even raises an arm. That wall changes everything. In open ice, a player can fall away from contact. Along the boards, there is nowhere to go. The body becomes trapped between speed and wood, between another player's momentum and a surface that does not move. If the victim is facing the glass, bending for the puck, reaching with one hand, or turning his shoulders at the last moment, the danger multiplies. He cannot prepare his spine. He cannot protect his neck. He cannot choose the angle. That is why boarding is not judged only by how hard the hit looks. It is judged by vulnerability, distance, timing, and result. A small shove can be dirtier than a huge hit if it comes when the opponent is defenseless. The ugly truth is that some of the worst plays do not look powerful at first. They look lazy. A careless extension of the arms, a frustrated bump, a player who knows the other man's numbers are showing and hits anyway. In hockey, numbers on the back should be a warning sign. They mean the opponent is turned away. They mean his eyes are not on the attacker. They mean his body is entering the most dangerous real estate in the rink without a shield. The boards are already a threat. Adding a hit from behind turns them into a weapon. This is where the difference between finishing a check and hunting a result becomes obvious. Finishing a check means taking away space and making the puck carrier feel pressure. Hitting from behind means using the wall to complete damage that the body could not create alone. And every player knows it. They know the sound when a shoulder goes in wrong. They know the silence after a head hits glass. They know the moment when a teammate stops yelling and starts skating fast toward the pile, because this is no longer about toughness. It is about fear. The NHL had to police boarding because the sport cannot function if every puck retrieval becomes a gamble with paralysis. The corner is already dangerous. The race is already violent. The game does not need a player's back turned into an invitation. The dirtiest hit from behind is not always the one that travels the farthest. It is the one delivered after the attacker has enough time to read the nameplate, see the danger, and still decide to push. That decision is why the penalty exists. Not because the boards are dangerous, because some players choose to use them. Clipping does not always make the crowd gasp at first. It does not have the same sound as a body exploding into the glass. It does not always create the cinematic image of a helmet flying or a player spinning through the air. That is exactly why it is so dangerous. A low hit attacks the foundation, the knees, the hips, the ligaments, the parts of the body that make skating possible in the first place. Hockey players can play through bruises, cuts, sore ribs, damaged hands, and pain that would make normal people sit down for a week. But when the knee goes, everything changes. A knee injury does not just hurt, it steals trust. A player comes back and wonders if the joint will hold when he cuts left. He wonders if the leg will answer when he stops hard at the blue line. He wonders if one bad pivot will send him back to surgery, rehab, and another season watching from the press box in a suit. That is the cruelty of clipping. It may not look like a knockout, but it can erase the thing that makes a player dangerous. His edge work, his acceleration, his ability to escape pressure by 1 inch, his confidence that the ice under him belongs to him. The low bridge hit is even uglier because it often punishes a player for being committed. A man is reaching for a puck, jumping to avoid contact, turning through open ice, or bracing for a normal shoulder. Then the opponent drops low, sometimes below the waist, sometimes straight into the knees, and the collision becomes a trap. The upper body keeps moving. The legs do not. That is how ligaments tear. That is how careers bend in a direction they were never supposed to bend. And the worst excuse is that the hitter was just protecting himself. There is a difference between getting low to absorb contact and diving into another player's legs. There is a difference between surviving impact and choosing the weakest point on the body, because it is easier than winning the battle clean. The NHL had to treat clipping as more than a minor cheap shot because it targets mobility itself. In a sport built on skating, attacking the knees is attacking the player's entire identity. A headshot can steal memory. A hit from behind can steal safety. A low bridge can steal movement. And once movement is gone, the player is still there, but the version of him that terrified defenders might never return. That is why these hits feel so cowardly. They do not challenge strength. They do not test balance. They do not win the puck with courage. They cut the legs out from under a career and then pretend it was just bad timing. Charging is what happens when a body check stops being a hockey play and starts becoming a launch. The rule exists because speed is not neutral. On skates, every extra stride adds violence. Every push into the ice turns weight into force. Every second of open runway gives the hitter more time to decide that he is not trying to win space anymore. He is trying to punish a person. That is the difference. A normal check happens inside the flow of the game. The puck moves. The defender closes. Contact arrives as part of a battle. The goal is pressure, separation, possession. It is rough, but it belongs to the play. Charging feels different before it even lands. You can see it building. A player locks onto a target from far away. His route straightens, his legs keep pumping. The puck might already be gone, but the decision has already been made. The hit is no longer a response, it is a destination. That is why charging can turn an ordinary collision into something predatory. The victim may expect contact, but not contact carrying half the rink behind it. He may brace for a bump and receive a crash. He may release the puck and still get flattened because the attacker was not reacting to the puck anymore. He was chasing impact. And once the skates leave the ice, the message becomes even clearer. A player who launches upward is not just finishing through the body. He is adding height to speed, turning a check into a missile. The head rises into the danger zone. The shoulders lift, the arms come up. The hit becomes less about hockey and more about damage. Fans understand why charging is tempting. It looks dramatic. It creates noise. It can change momentum in 1 second. A huge hit can wake up a bench, shake an opponent, and make an arena feel like it just tipped sideways. But the league had to draw the line because entertainment cannot be the only standard. If a player is allowed to build unlimited speed for the purpose of blasting someone who is no longer part of the immediate play, then the rink becomes a runway for revenge. Charging is dirty because it disguises intent as effort. It says, "I was just skating hard." But everyone can see when skating hard becomes hunting. The NHL did not ban charging to remove aggression. It banned the idea that a player could convert distance into violence and call it compete level. There is a beautiful kind of speed in hockey, the kind that creates a breakaway, the kind that burns a defender wide, the kind that turns a loose puck into a scoring chance. Charging is the ugly version of that same gift. Speed pointed at a vulnerable body, with the puck reduced to an excuse. And when speed becomes an excuse for damage, the rulebook has to answer. Elbowing and stick work are the dirty moves that thrive in clutter. They do not need open ice. They do not need a dramatic collision. They live in the corners, in front of the net, after the whistle, inside the tiny private wars that happen while the puck is somewhere else and the broadcast camera is chasing the obvious story. A raised elbow is one of the oldest shortcuts in hockey. A shoulder check requires angle, timing, and body position. An elbow only needs a player to lift the sharpest part of his arm into the worst possible place: chin, jaw, temple, nose. It turns a normal battle into a sudden headshot, and because it can happen inside contact, the guilty player can pretend it was natural movement. That is the trick. Dirty stick work is even more cowardly because the stick gives distance. A slash to the hands, a jab to the ribs, a cross-check into the lower back, a butt end hidden in traffic, a blade that rides up under the gloves. These are not hockey plays. They are messages. They say, "I can hurt you when the referee is looking somewhere else." And for a long time, that was part of the sport's dark language. Defensemen used sticks to clear the crease. Forwards used little shots to provoke retaliation. Veterans taught rookies where to place pain without getting caught. The front of the net became a place where legal strength and illegal punishment blended together until nobody could tell where one ended and the other began. But cameras changed the deal. High-definition replay made the hidden visible. A stick to the teeth was no longer just a player suddenly bleeding. A cross-check to the numbers was no longer just a man losing balance. A glove to the face was no longer just rough stuff. The league could see intent. Fans could see intent. Opponents could clip the video before the game even ended. That is why these small, dirty actions became impossible to ignore. They were not spectacular enough to become legendary on their own, but they happened constantly. They added up. They created injuries away from the puck, away from the play, away from any honest attempt to score, defend, or win possession. The elbow is dirty because it weaponizes a joint. The stick is dirty because it turns equipment into a spear, a club, or a hidden knife. Hockey already gives players enough tools to be dangerous: speed, size, strength, boards, ice, momentum. The league could not allow the stick and elbow to become extra weapons inside that violence. Because once the puck stops mattering and the target becomes a mouth, a wrist, a spine, or a face, the game has stopped being hard. It has become cheap. And cheap violence is exactly what the rulebook was built to chase out. Fighting was never fully banned from NHL culture, but uncontrolled revenge had to be contained. That matters because some of the dirtiest moments in hockey do not start with the first hit. They start with what happens next. A player gets clipped. A star gets boarded. A rookie gets embarrassed. Someone takes a run at the goalie. The bench sees it. The crowd feels it. The temperature changes. Suddenly, the puck is almost irrelevant because every player on the ice understands that a debt has been created. Old hockey had a simple answer. You pay for it. Sometimes that meant a clean hard shift. Sometimes it meant a fight. Sometimes it meant a player with a very specific job hopping over the boards, finding the guilty man, and turning justice into bare knuckles. There was a logic to it. If the league would not protect players, players would protect each other. If a cheap shot could pass without consequence, the next consequence would come from a teammate. That threat kept certain predators nervous. It also gave teams a way to respond when the rulebook felt too slow. But revenge has its own disease. Once retaliation becomes normal, the game can spiral. One dirty hit becomes one fight. One fight becomes another hit. A clean player gets dragged into a message he did not send. A fourth-line enforcer goes after a skilled player because the real target will not answer. The original crime gets buried under a pile of new ones. That is why the instigator rule mattered. The NHL was not saying emotion should vanish. It was saying that a player could not simply decide to start a fight and call it justice without consequence. The league had to separate protection from escalation. It had to stop teams from turning every insult, every slash, every dangerous hit into a private courtroom with fists as the verdict. The uncomfortable truth is that fighting sometimes punished dirty hockey and sometimes protected it. A player could deliver a questionable hit, survive one staged fight, and act like the debt was paid. A team could spend more energy chasing revenge than preventing the next injury. A crowd could cheer the response so loudly that everyone forgot the victim was still in the quiet room being checked for a concussion. That is the problem with frontier justice on ice. It feels satisfying. It is not always fair. It is not always safe, and it does not always solve the thing that started the violence. The NHL had to bring discipline back from the bench and into the league office. Not perfectly, not without controversy, but the message became clear. You can defend a teammate. You can play with anger. You can make the next shift miserable. But you cannot turn hockey into a revenge loop and expect the rulebook to look away. Because sometimes the dirtiest weapon is not a stick, an elbow, or a knee. Sometimes it is the excuse. He had it coming. The Scott Stevens problem is not really about one man. It is about an entire era. Because if you want to understand how much hockey has changed, do not start with a rulebook. Start with an old highlight reel. Watch a defender step into the middle of the ice. Watch a forward cut across with the puck. Watch the crowd rise before the collision even happens. Because everyone in the building can feel the trap closing. Then comes the hit. Shoulder through the upper body, head snapping back. Gloves floating away. A star player suddenly reduced to silence. The arena erupts. The bench explodes. The replay runs again and again, not as evidence, but as celebration. That was the language of intimidation. Scott Stevens became one of the clearest symbols of that language because his hits were not random. They had patience. They had timing. He did not need to chase chaos. He waited for players to enter his territory, then made the middle of the ice feel haunted. For years, that was not just legal. It was admired. It was leadership. It was playoff hockey. It was the price of carrying the puck where giants lived. But the modern eye sees those clips differently. Not because every hit was the same, not because every collision deserves the same judgment, but because the sport now understands what the old broadcasts often ignored. The head matters. Vulnerability matters. A player turning through traffic is not an open invitation to erase him. A hit that becomes legendary because the victim cannot get up is not automatically a clean masterpiece. That is the problem. Hockey history is full of plays that were legal in their own time, praised in their own time, even essential to winning in their own time. But legality is not innocence. Sometimes it just means the rulebook had not caught up to the damage yet. And that is why this topic is uncomfortable. The league did not simply wake up one morning and decide to become softer. It watched the cost accumulate. Concussions, shortened careers, stars missing playoff games, players admitting years later that they were not right after certain collisions. The old highlights did not disappear, but the meaning behind them changed. A hit that once said, "Keep your head up now," asks a harder question. Did the defender have another choice? Could he win the play without targeting the head? Was the purpose separation or destruction? The Scott Stevens problem is really the hockey problem. The sport built legends out of fear, then had to decide which parts of that fear belonged in the future. You can respect the player, respect the era, respect the impact, and still admit that many of those collisions would live in a very different disciplinary world today. That is not hypocrisy. That is evolution. The game did not erase its past. It learned to flinch when watching it. The strangest argument against banning dirty moves is that it made hockey weaker. That sounds tough until you actually watch the best players in the world play at full speed. Modern hockey is not soft. It is faster than the old game. The gaps close quicker. The forecheck arrives sooner. Defensemen move like forwards. Forwards backcheck like machines. Goalies read plays through traffic that would make most people dizzy. The violence did not vanish. It compressed. Players have less time, less space, and less forgiveness. What changed is not the presence of danger. It is the permission to be careless with it. A clean hit still matters. A heavy forecheck still changes a shift. A defenseman who can punish entries still affects every opponent crossing the blue line. A team that plays hard along the boards can still drain the will out of another team. None of that disappeared because the league started punishing headshots, boarding, clipping, charging, slew-footing, and hidden stick work. The difference is that the target had to change. Not the head, not the numbers, not the knees, not the player who has already released the puck and cannot defend himself. The target became the play again. That is what people miss when they say the sport has gone soft. The rules did not remove toughness. They demanded better toughness. It takes discipline to hit hard without hitting high. It takes skating to angle a player instead of launching through him. It takes strength to win the wall without driving a man face first into it. It takes intelligence to intimidate without crossing the line into suspension. Dirty hockey is often lazy hockey wearing a scary mask. It chooses the shortcut, the blindside route, the low hit, the late hit, the hidden slash, the shove when the other player cannot answer. It creates the illusion of dominance, but real dominance is harder. Real dominance is taking away time, space, and options while staying on the ice and helping your team win. That is why bans did not kill hockey. They protected the reason people watch it. Fans do not pay to see the best players vanish into dark rooms. They pay to see speed under pressure, skill under threat, courage inside chaos. They want danger, yes, but danger with meaning. A race to a loose puck. A playoff hit that separates possession. A shot block that looks insane. A goalie refusing to break under pressure. A captain taking contact to make the pass. That is hockey. Not a knee hunt, not a headshot, not a player staring at the ceiling because someone decided the rulebook was optional for 1 second. The sport is still brutal. It is just less willing to confuse brutality with stupidity. Every banned move tells the same story in a different language. The slew foot says balance matters because a player who cannot control his fall cannot protect his life. The blindside hit says warning matters because a man who never sees danger coming is not being challenged. He is being ambushed. The headshot says the brain is not a trophy. The hit from behind says the boards are already dangerous enough without someone choosing to turn them into a weapon. The low bridge says knees are not fair targets. Charging says speed is not an excuse. Elbows and stick work say hidden violence is still violence. Revenge fighting says justice becomes dirty when it loses control. Put them together, and you see the real history of hockey discipline. The NHL did not simply ban random acts because they looked bad on television. It banned patterns. The same vulnerable positions, the same cheap angles, the same injuries, the same excuses repeated until they became impossible to believe. I did not mean to. He should have kept his head up. It was just a hockey play. His feet got tangled. I was finishing my check. Every era has its favorite excuse. Every rule change is the league finally saying the excuse is not enough anymore. And that is where the game stands now. Still violent, still emotional, still capable of making a building shake from one clean collision, but a little less willing to sacrifice players to tradition just because tradition has a good highlight package. The truth is, hockey does not need dirty moves to be terrifying. The sport is already terrifying. It asks players to think at impossible speed while opponents close from every direction. It asks them to carry the puck through traffic, absorb contact, fight for inches along the boards, screenshots they can barely see, and step in front of frozen rubber moving fast enough to break bone. That is more than enough danger. The best version of hockey does not need stolen balance, hidden elbows, hunted knees, or heads used as targets. It does not need a player leaving the ice with no memory of the shift. It does not need the cheap stuff pretending to be courage, because courage is not hitting someone who cannot defend himself. Courage is playing hard when the line is clear, and choosing not to cross it. That is the real evolution, not a softer game, a sharper one. A game where violence still exists, but has to earn its place. A game where the biggest hits are not automatically the best hits. A game where the rulebook finally learned the difference between fear and damage. The dirtiest moves disappear when the league admits the price is too high. Not because players became weak, because the game finally became honest about what strength is supposed to look like.